Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Outgrow's Marketer of the Month. I'm your host, Dr. Saksham Sharda. I'm the creative director at Outgrow.co. And for this month, we're going to interview Tod Sacerdoti, who is the CEO of Pipedream. Thanks for joining us, Tod.
Thanks for having me.
So, Tod, we're going to start with a rapid fire round just to break the ice. You get 3 passes. In case you don't want to answer the question, you can just say pass, but try to keep your answers to one word or one sentence only, okay?
Okay.
All right, so the first one, at what age do you want to retire?
Never.
How long does it take you to get ready in the mornings?
About 30 minutes.
Most embarrassing moment of your life?
I'll pass on that one.
Favorite color?
Blue.
What time of day are you most inspired?
11 p.m.
How many hours of sleep can you survive on?
5.
Fill in the blank. An upcoming marketing trend is blank.
I'll pass on that one.
The city in which the best kiss of your life happened.
San Francisco for sure.
Pick one, Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey.
Jack Dorsey.
The biggest mistake of your career.
Not working at Facebook.
How do you relax?
Sports.
How many cups of coffee do you drink per day?
0 to 1.
A habit of yours that you hate.
Competitiveness.
The most valuable skill you've learned in life.
Competitiveness.
And the last question is your favorite Netflix show.
I'm going with Narcos at the moment.
Okay. All right. Well, that was the end of the rapid fire round. Now we're going to go on to the long form questions, and these you can answer as long and lengthily as you like. And the first one is you've talked about how important networking is. So, in your opinion, how can one identify ways to develop long term effective relationships? And should relationships, in your opinion, be completely transactional?
The answer to the last part is definitively no. I've talked actually on other podcasts a lot about building long-term relationships, and I think being non-transactional is probably the most, core element of sort of seeking those out and being successful at them. I'll give you an example actually, because it's very top of mind. In the last, few weeks or so, I've been just getting bombarded with sales emails to myself as a CEO of Pipedream, typically from companies that we're already working with. You could argue that we already have existing, maybe near term or recent term relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm astounded how often that the relationships are approached in essentially a purely transactional way. And I would say the vast majority, 90% plus, have on a silver platter, a way to build a real relationship, find win-wins, find ways to help our business to grow our relationships with them. And yet, the easy path, the simple thing to do is just make it entirely transactional, ask for money and, focus elsewhere if it's not an easy win. And that never drives, long-term value in effective relationships.
So, what's a good example of a relationship building that you would give that you've seen?
In the sales, most of my discussions are about kind of being a CEO founder, but I'll take the sales example as a test case here. But the absolute first question that every salesperson should ask when they contact me is, how could we help you grow your business? I mean, that's what I care about as the CEO of the company. First and foremost is I'm trying to build a startup into a meaningful, rapidly growing company. And many of these companies that we contract with, I'm talking about companies like AWS and Snowflake and Redis and Twilio. These companies can help our businesses in very material ways, probably in ways that the salesperson actually has direct access to. And it's literally like the first 5 minutes of a 30-minute conversation could just be about, let me learn more about your business and how I could help you. And instead, they're approached with generally like, how much are you spending today? What would it take to get you to spend more tomorrow? And it's just completely backwards. I mean, my response to that in most cases is I'd rather not take the call, just do it over email. And basically it's just a negotiation, right? There's no relationship building at all.
And so, what kind of employing or recruitment techniques should one employ in order to get the right people? So we hear startup founders say compared to recruiting, fundraising was easy. What are the ways startups can hire the best talent for this kind of, relationship building and growth?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who says fundraising was easy was probably being interviewed in 2021, not 2022. Fundraising isn't as easy as it has been recently. But that all said, I think it is fair to say that raising money is still far easier than it's been historically. I mean, the things that we think about internally at Pipedream in terms of attracting great talent, first and foremost, is be a remote company, right? We just have my last company was based in Silicon Valley. We hired locally. I now run a fully remote company. We hire across the entire country, and just having a much larger pool of candidates is a great place to start. Secondly, I talk about running downhill, like build a product that people want to work for. The last company I ran was an ad tech company, and convincing like top tier developers to spend, all of their time and energy on making ads more effective was a hard sell. Right. And, I now work for a company that builds products for other developers. Like many developers love the idea of working for a company that builds product for them and their peers. And by the way, it doesn't have to be developer tools specifically. I'm just saying like, what product you're building does materially matter in your ability to recruit, great people. And then I'd say the last thing, which I think is most in people's founders' control, which is make working at your company the best part of a job at your company. At my last company, I used to always share, we were at 400 employees and we were hiring, tens of people a month. And I would do these cocktail, hours with people who had recently joined the company. And they would always tell me, I would ask them like, why did you join? And I was always waiting for them to say, oh, the CEO is a visionary, or, the company is so differentiated and it's going to do well. And that was never the answer. Like the answer was interviewing at this company made me realize I would love working there. Right. That's completely in the control of the founder and CEO and the team, which is like when someone's making a judgment of what it's like to work there, the best data they have is what it was like to interview there. Right. And if your interview process sucks, right, it probably sucks to work there. I mean, that's just the facts. So those are at least the things that are top of mind for me, at least in terms of attracting great talent today.
And so, for those of the listeners who don't know what Pipedream does, could you explain in a sentence or two what Pipedream does?
Yeah, Pipedream is an integration platform for developers that lets developers quickly build workflows connecting about 1,000 SaaS apps, primarily on the web. A lot of people call it a Zapier for developers, is a shorthand if you want a Hollywood analogy.
So, this is like a Zapier for, you're saying, developers.
That is often how our product is described by our customers. Yes.
And when did this term come along in your journey in Pipedream? At what point did this analogy start being applied?
Um, I mean, I think Zapier is probably the most well-known integration platform. By no means is it the only, and it's definitely not a product targeted for technical users. But whenever there's a company that's a wild success, of which Zapier is, people often use it as like the cornerstone of their analogy. And many developers, I think, for a long time, have loved the abstractions that Zapier provided. They just didn't like that they would no longer have code level control of their workflows. So we often use the phrase code level control when you need it and no code when you don't. Whereas, Zapier and its 1,000 Zapier clones, are for knowledge workers, and it's a no code tool, full stop.
So, how a business wins or loses is increasingly dependent nowadays on how well they connect to external party apps, devices, or services. So, what, in your opinion, is the future of APIs, and to what extent are they going to affect the way business is done in these times?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about that, the question is that I think actually it's easier than ever for companies to sort of connect with other companies via API. And that's because there's so many, integration type platforms available. So I sort of think the market will bifurcate where companies will be responsible for what I call the blockbuster integrations. Basically, the integrations that every user expects to be like first class in the product and, is completely like integrated in a way that as if it was a feature built by the product that you're using. Those will almost always be built by the company directly. The second category, really, which is the majority of the other integrations, historically, those would have to be built by a product. And now I think many of those can be solved by third party platforms. And then I think the piece that has historically been unsolved and is now going to be solved almost exclusively by third parties is like the long tail. Now we're talking, these integration platforms now solve thousands of integrations, not hundreds. And so it's very unlikely that you won't be able to find a way to connect whatever app it is you're using with whatever, other app you use internally. So I think all of that's getting easier. So in many ways, for the core company that you're asking the question about here, I think that you just focus on the blockbuster integrations and you make sure that they're world class.
And how does one go about picking the blockbuster integrations?
I mean, usually they're clear. I mean, the whole reason they're quote unquote blockbusters because every user wants them. Like I always say, like if your users want to get notified about changes in the app or errors or something like that in Slack, that's like an obvious blockbuster integration. Like a large percentage of your company customers need to get notified and a large percentage of them use Slack. So they would expect a one-click like get notified in Slack as a feature. But like, does that mean they expect to get notified in Discord or in Mattermost or, by SMS or, by some other like longer tail thing? Probably not. Those aren't, I think, reasonable expectations. So when I say blockbuster, it should almost be so obvious you don't have to do any work. The harder question is when you get out of the blockbuster ones and you're like, well, some of our customers really like it and we think we could drive revenue, but we don't really think it applies to that many of our customers. That's not a blockbuster integration, and that's likely where third parties will come in.
And so, what are some of the up and coming integrations that you've seen in your platform?
Well, that's a great question. I'd say we've been surprised by, I mean, none of these are going to be a total shock, I guess, once you think about them, but we've been surprised recently by Notion, actually. Notion, I would say, is far ahead of where we would have anticipated it. Airtable and Discord were kind of like the last generation of things that surprised us. I mean, more than anything, the category that is, the two categories, I guess I would say, that are most commonly outperforming versus expectation is one is sending like data to a quote unquote database. And I use air quotes because that could mean Snowflake, but it could also mean like Google Sheets or Notion or Airtable. So, sort of like lightweight databases is probably one. And then the second is sending data into notification messaging apps, many of which I already mentioned. So those two categories are probably the most outperforming on a relative basis.
And do you think that do you inform these particular companies that they're doing better on your platform, or do they get to know automatically, or does their behavior change once they get to know that they're doing better on these
Yeah, I mean,
platforms?
it's better, I guess, is all relative because, some of these products have like 10 million users, right? So if we have thousands or tens of thousands of users using it, it's significant to us. It's less significant to them. But I would say that we notice a very clear progression, which is as apps get used more on our platform, those apps spend more time making sure that our integration into them is great. Not all of them do the work to do those integrations. Some of them do, but many of them will, sort of partner with and or kind of advise or support in the integration in any way they can. So it's sort of like the more relevant we are to their business, the more attention they spend on it. But we don't architect the business assuming that their participation is required. Like we're going to support Notion no matter what. If it's a mediocre integration, it's better than nothing. But we would like it to be as world class as possible.
So you yourself worked in several businesses across, specific disciplines that may be common to each of the businesses that you've worked with. So what are some of the specific disciplines common to each of these businesses that you've worked with that create and deliver value in their particular fields?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's worth digging a little bit into the question, because in my mind, there are lots of loose similarities across different categories. But if I've learned anything from like being an investor, that it's almost the things that are anomalous in these companies are what makes companies most great. So if I'm always looking for the exact same playbook that I've seen work at other companies, I find that that will almost inevitably lead me to miss like the best opportunities. So I almost spend my time as an investor on the exact opposite, which is like, what is it about this business that is so different from anything I've ever seen before that makes it worthy of like spending the additional time and understanding? Because those are usually like the best outcomes. And I'll just give some simple examples. Like maybe they have a way of acquiring customers that's free and extremely scalable, but I've never seen any company succeed at doing so. Or maybe, the majority of their product is actually built by their community in a way that they just have engagement that's so far beyond, anything I had seen in any other company. Um, or maybe they're able to deliver their service in a way that's so much more cost effective than any other company I had seen. Those are the types of things that lead, I think, to the best investments, as opposed to, I like investing in companies that acquire their customers from search, and I've done 5 deals and I'm looking for 5 more. You can do well there, but I think it's very hard to find like the true outliers in that model, because likely there's 50 other people that are doing the exact same, sort of filtering of companies.
So, based on your industry and investing experience, where do you think the future of SaaS is headed as a whole?
Um, I mean, that's a pretty broad question. I guess I would start by saying that I couldn't be more bullish on B2B SaaS software than I am currently. So I know we had a huge run up over the last 5 years, and the last, let's call it, 6 to 9 months has been pretty brutal, and valuations have come down dramatically. Um, but I always share the sort of anecdote that, a few years ago, I'd probably only seen 100 or maybe 200, businesses like in detail. And now I'm probably in the, closer to 1,000 businesses in detail. And what I've learned is, at any time in any market, in any valuation, environment, like there are truly amazing B2B SaaS companies being built that have, you know, zero customer acquisition costs, 90+% margins, are growing at, 5x year over year. And these just businesses, oftentimes they're in like relatively small niches when they start, but there's just no way those businesses are not going to be significant over time. And so I guess if I would just summarize the future of SaaS, to me is just, there's going to be more B2B SaaS companies in every category than there are today. And they're going to be truly amazing businesses created in those niches. So I'm excited about what the future holds for SaaS.
And so, some of these, could you give us an example of some of these B2B SaaS companies that are solving these niche problems?
I mean, I would say at a high level, I hate when sort of investors like talk about their book
Mhm.
of companies they've invested, but I would say I'll just give you some example categories. So we invest a lot in data companies, and it's never, in the history of the internet, it's never been bigger and more profitable for companies to sell data. And so, and it's way cheaper today to build data companies than it's ever been because of all the cloud providers. So within the data category, there's lots of niches, right? There's data for, academia. There's data for marketing. There's machine learning models that use, data that's brought by the vendor. There's data being applied in every category. So that's one that we spend a lot of time on. I would say, secondly, the most exciting category right now is basically applied AI, which is, from a consumer standpoint, is being talked about in all these like image generation sites. But we're basically seeing it applied in almost every business category in which it would make sense. And so it's never been cheaper to build those companies. It's never been cheaper to deliver those services. So it could be anything from like writing marketing copy to, basically, figuring out fraud within the fintech companies, insurance book, let's say. So we see it applied AI probably more than any other category. And then lastly, I would just say that like within vertical SaaS, I mean, these are the classic niche category, which is like could be software for architects or software for dentists or software for like any vertical. There seems to be a continued kind of like endless stream of opportunity to provide automation within a specific vertical and get 50+% market share in those niches, and then eventually expand to adjacent categories than we've ever seen. So at a high level, those are three just broad areas where we're seeing great opportunities.
And speaking of fintech companies, fintechs typically begin disrupting the market with ambitious goals, but quickly realize it would be difficult and expensive to attack the market directly. So, would you say that turning to partnerships with established players to benefit from their existing reputation, financial means, and customer basis is the best course of action in this situation?
I don't run a fintech company, so I always sort of like defer to founders who do. But I have invested, and actually, some of my best investments in my life have actually been in fintech companies. And I would just say that this advice doesn't exactly match my experience with those investments. Like I think partnerships in general can help startups, fintech or otherwise, but I think they're rarely a panacea because, finding product market fit and creating some sort of like market disruption and advantage is the goal. And partnerships can be easily replicated. So, I found, at least particularly early in a startup's journey, partnerships typically like remove focus on product innovation rather than encourage it, because they sort of like distract the team to rely on the brand and the halo from the partner. And oftentimes those partners don't want to king make a single startup, right? So they'll likely work with your direct competitors as well. And so it's like you kind of want to, I think, make market disruption in ways where you can like close the door behind you. And partnerships generally aren't that. Partnerships are generally like the door is, you've opened the door, you've proven the model, and you're letting other people come in. So they can be helpful, but I wouldn't say I would recommend it first, or look for it when I'm trying to understand why somebody's doing particularly well.
And so, when it comes to investing again, what are some tactics that VCs use when it comes to finding the right companies? I know you told us one of your tactics, but in general, what are people using?
Well, I mean, the term innovative may not be the right word, but sort of like the best modern innovative, like of this moment VC firms, look more like companies than they do look like traditional partnerships. They have data science teams that are, using data to identify companies to reach out to that they think are doing particularly well. And they have like inside sales teams. They would never describe it as that, but they're basically inside sales teams where, partners or junior partners are sort of like programmatically using marketing tools to outreach, to founders. So you have one team kind of identifying companies, another team reaching out and trying to build those relationships to like get access. And then who actually invests, I think, is a little bit dependent on the firm. But what's most interesting to me about these sort of modern, best firms is that they're kind of like partner independent, meaning like it's the same way at like a software company where you have good salespeople and not as good salespeople, but you can swap out, you can hire a new salesperson, they can be successful. Like these new firms, they can hire new partners and swap them out. And they're not dependent on like the individual relationships of some hero partner like the traditional firms were. And so to me, that's actually the most interesting, which is like they're starting to use the best practices from software to build investment businesses. And in many ways, they just, they're fundamentally changing the dynamics of the investment industry as a result.
And so, where's the investment industry headed in that case?
Well, I mean, you could argue that if we follow that path, that you'll have, kind of you'll never have a real changing of the guard. The absolute top, like the top tier, 5 to 10 firms, I don't think those change, but I do think you'll have a kind of changing of the guard within that, kind of middle range where probably the majority of the money is. So I think that's exciting for, Silicon Valley and tech in general. I will say, as a founder who's, bombarded with inside sales emails, I'm not totally convinced that this process will scale. So I think that there is a little bit of reckoning coming down where, some of these new innovative firms, like every software sales team ever, by the way, are going to realize over time that that technique is not going to continue to work as everyone replicates it. So, I think that means that there's going to be, as there always is, like the next wave of differentiation on the VC side. If I knew what that was, I would do it, but it's hard to know exactly what it is at this time.
And is applied AI going to make an inroad there?
I mean, I've personally looked at a bunch of these companies that are like doing the identification, like, oh, here are the 10 best companies. And it's like, I'd say the majority of the time I'm underwhelmed, but every once in a while you like look at a list and you're like, they identified, a small number of companies of which I probably would have heard of any of them. And, let's say a list of 10 or 20 that are like their number one recommendation at this moment in time. And some of them are amazing, right? So it's like you're starting to see, it's not really applied AI as much as probably like machine learning, but there are pockets that pique my interest, I guess I would say.
All right. So the last question for you is a personal question, which is, what would you be doing in your life if not all this?
Oh, such a good question. My favorite answer to this question that anyone ever said when I asked them that is they said, I'd be a cult leader. And I always thought that was the biggest answer, but that doesn't really resonate for me. If I wasn't, I'm at my core, I'm a builder, right? So if I wasn't building companies, I would be building something else. I'm not the inventor, the recluse inventor, like in a, basement with no windows tinkering type, but, I'd be wanting to build something. So whether that's something physical or an organization or a nonprofit, or, I'd be building something that, had meaning to me and hopefully meaning to other people.
Okay. All right. Well, that was the last question. Thanks, everyone, for joining us for this month's episode of Outgrow's Marketer of the Month. That was Tod Sacerdoti, who's the CEO at Pipedream. Thanks for joining us, Tod.
Thanks for having me.
Check out their website for more details, and we'll see you once again next month with another Marketer of the Month.